Last week we started a new collection of talks called the 167. And it just comes from the idea that we've got 168 hours in a week. And the truth is, if we really take a look at it, if we only give 1 hour to Jesus a week, it's not a legit relationship. That isn't real followership. It's just Christian in name only. But we finish that with, hey, if we're going to be followers of Jesus, we don't just follow Jesus to a facility that maybe sometimes we reference as a church, but that we would follow Jesus in every part of our life throughout the rest of the week in the other 167 hours that we have. In other words, we said if you're followers of Jesus, then you are 167 people. We are 167 people. And while we kind of laid that out last week, for the next couple of weeks, we want to practically walk that out and ask the question, well, what does that mean? That's like, it's great in theory. You can put it on a hat, put it on a sweatshirt, and make some swag with it. That's fine. But at the end of the day, like, what does it actually look like to be a 167 kind of person? And not just to check the box, I'm a Christian in name only, and because I go to church on a Sunday. What does it look like? Where should our focus be to pull that off? And to start this, I want to ask a key question. And I think this is a really important question. Here it is. Do you regularly interact with people each week who would benefit if they were to know and follow Jesus? Like when we think through, what does it take and why would we want to do this? That's the key question. Do you interact with regularly people who would benefit if they knew and followed Jesus? Now, you can answer it in one of two ways, yes or no. If your answer is no, there's another conversation we should have because you're likely living in a bubble by yourself, and that's no good. You come out just to go to church, that's not a good thing either. The answer to all of us is yes. Like, we do not live in a world that is 100% Christian. In fact, just within a 5-mile radius of the courthouse square, 64 to 72% of people have zero affiliation to any faith, not just Christianity, but any faith at all. And so if you walk around anywhere in Newnan, then you are walking amongst people where half of the people, at least minimum, most likely up to 3/4 of the people, have zero faith connection. And so the question is, would their life benefit if they knew and followed Jesus? And if that's the case, I want you just to maybe think of one of those people. I'm not saying, hey, think of the person that does all the bad stuff. I'm saying think of the person who's maybe in a state of life right now where it's very unstable. And think of someone that's in a place in their life right now where they have no idea where, like, what's next. And they're searching and they're seeking, but they're just wandering around. And sometimes it feels like aimlessly, just trying to figure it out, and nothing goes their way. Think of somebody who's struggling with maybe some interpersonal connection and is just constantly angry. Think about someone that when you think through, like, man, they're missing some peace that comes with a relationship with Jesus. And then if you're blessed enough to know their family, think about their spouse if they have one, or their significant other. Think about their kids if they have them. Would those people benefit if that person knew and followed Jesus? And if the answer is yes, well, then it's two simple words. This is why we should be 167 people. We should just be ready. We should be ready to be that person for them on their behalf. We should step into their life. If they would benefit from knowing and following Jesus, then it makes sense. Then maybe they would get to know Jesus because of something that we did. And I think this is all very valid, and I think it makes sense. However, I would also say that at the same time, the answer is yes, that's why we should be 167 people, but at the same time, it's also no, that's not why. If you think that your relationship with Jesus in the 167 has to do with other people and their benefit, that's a byproduct. The truth is, if you have no 167 following Jesus, the issue isn't what they're going to learn from you, it's that you haven't learned yourself. And the truth is, if it's just a 1 hour check the box, call me a Christian, well, the last people you ought to think about is introducing someone else to Jesus, because I'm not sure you've been introduced to him yourself. You've been introduced to the idea of Jesus. Maybe you've even become a fan of Jesus. And you check a box on a Sunday morning, and you call yourself a Christian. But Jesus never invited us to go to church. In fact, he never invited us to be called Christians. He said, will you come follow me? That was his invitation. Now, when you hear this, what I don't want you to hear is that there's this expectation that you figure out the 167 hours in your life and you are perfect. That there's no issues, that all of a sudden you've decided that real Christians can figure it all out and have all the things just ordered and kind of put in their proper place. That's not what it's saying at all. Jesus explains himself in his own life. The cross is necessary because you are not perfect. And even if you give 167 hours to Jesus, you still will fall short. Even your greatest 167 effort won't be enough to actually make you good. But he is asking us to follow imperfectly every single day, every single hour. If you were to take inventory of your 167, let's just do a mental exercise. Let's just think through your 167 and just kind of think through what makes up all of your week. Would you put, if you were to kind of write everything down, would you put like an abbreviation, let's say GH, like God honoring? If you were to classify it, would it have a GH next to it, or when you looked at it, it's like, I didn't really honor God? Just everything in your week, whatever it is, words, actions, all those things, put them all together, put them on a sheet of paper. How many GHs do you have that's starting to classify as this is God honoring? And that begins to tell you how much 167 are we giving to Jesus. Now, when we think about the 167 and we think about what that list would be, the majority of the list is what we're going to talk about today would fall into one of two categories: words and actions, conversations and things that we do. And so when we think about words, and we ask the question, well, if we're going to give 167 hours of words to Jesus, or at least attempt to follow Jesus with our words as best we can, then is there anything that the Bible gives us insight into how that might take place? And we find a little bit of this answer in a book that is referred to as a book of wisdom. Its official name is the book of Proverbs. And we find it in chapter 15. I just want to walk through 4 verses really quickly that talk about our words. 15:1. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Now, this is something I know a lot about, especially the back half. I know how to make people angry. Like, this is good. Before I made rules about not arguing on Facebook, man, I could tear them up. I'd have people worried about their Facebook all day. You know what I'm saying? Like, let's have a debate on Facebook. Let me just ruin someone's weekend. You know what I'm saying? I mean, you just gaslight people nonstop. You know what I'm saying? That's easy to do. Some of y'all think they're actually arguing with you. They have no idea. They're just like, man, I have fun ruining people's lives. That's it. Not me anymore. I'm saying other people. And notice that it uses the word gentle. You know, if I were to ask all of you, hey, would you just put together a list of 5 adjectives that would describe me? I'm really pulling that none of y'all put gentle on it. Like, I don't want to be known as, he's just a gentle Teddy. I don't want to be known as that. That's not me. I just don't put that on my tombstone or none of those things. However, I also wrestle with the reality that the Bible tells us that one of the results of being a follower of Jesus is the increase in gentleness. And so it doesn't matter how rough around the edges you are, or what neighborhood you came from, or how you grew up. The truth is the more that you interact with Jesus, the more that gentleness does become a part of who you are. That's what it looks like to say, hey, I'm 167 in with Jesus. He's going to get all my time so that you can orient my life however you want to. Now, we will have varying levels of gentleness because some of y'all got a real big head start. But gentleness, nevertheless, will come through at some point. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Verse 2, the tongue of the wise adorns knowledge, but the mouth of the fool gushes folly. When I hear the word gushes, I immediately think about the fruit snack Gushers. Anybody with me? You know what I'm talking about? Gushers, I'm telling you, let me just give you a secret on Gushers. What you got to do with Gushers is on a hot July day. Do they even make Gushers anymore? I don't know. We need to order them. Thank you. That's great. That was a resounding yes. Here's the pro tip. You got to put the Gushers in the refrigerator and then come in from outside, and then all of a sudden you release the gushiness in your mouth. You know what I'm saying? And then all of a sudden, like, man, I can get through a hot July day if I got some Gushers. Gushers in the fruit snack world, positive thing. In Proverbs, not a positive thing. It says, gushes folly. The fool gushes golly. Gushes golly. The fool gushes folly. See those words that sit in opposition to one another? Adorns knowledge, gushes folly. that knowledge sits on us or we ooze folly? Verse 3 says, the eyes of the Lord are everywhere, keeping watch on the wicked and the good. Now, this is not a warning to make you like heartbeat faster, like, oh, Big Brother's always watching, that kind of thing. Number one, God's much bigger than Big Brother. Like, he really sees everything. But I will say this, that's not the warning that's trying to be created. He's just trying to say, hey, here's the deal. It doesn't matter whether you're good or evil, wicked, good, the best, not the best. It doesn't matter. God watches all of it. In other words, let me just set you up. If you've had a struggle with verse 1 and verse 2, if you've had an issue with gushing folly, if you had an issue with stirring up anger, you don't have to be afraid to go confess that to God, because God's saying, I already know. And the proof that he already knows is the cross has already taken place. Like, the reason the cross takes place is because he already knew. And so we don't have to approach him with, I got this struggle. I got this struggle that you're probably not aware of, and go through the awkward phase. He's just like, no, I've been watching, I know. That's why I sent the cross, because I was hoping we'd have this conversation. I've been prepped and ready, fully aware of your inadequacies. And that's why I gave you Jesus. Verse 4, the soothing tongue is a tree of life, but a perverse tongue crushes the spirit. I'm sure you can probably think back to a moment when someone used their words to absolutely crush you. And maybe on the outside you took it well. Like, maybe on the outside you took it well and you're like, I'm not gonna let him see this. I'm not gonna let her see this. But on the inside, it was like just crushing. And we have that stands again in contrast to words that are like the tree of life. And the image we want to get here is that there's a tree that bears fruit. And when we eat that fruit, it allows us to sustain the life we have. It's a good thing. So different than words that would crush us and maybe try and snuff out the life that we have. That sets up the reality of the power of words. And I would say that Proverbs 15, 1 through 4 is just words basics. If we really want to get into more of an advanced approach to our words, we need to skip forward a number of years and actually go to a book that was written by the little brother of Jesus. His name is James. And James gives us a really great insight just to how deep the rabbit hole goes with our words. He says this, when we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we can turn the whole animal. Or take ships as an example. Although they are so large and are driven by strong winds, they are steered by a very small rudder wherever the pilot wants to go. Likewise, the tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boasts. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. The tongue also is a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole body, sets the whole course of one's life on fire, and is itself set on fire by hell. All kinds of animals, birds, reptiles, and sea creatures are being tamed and have been tamed by mankind. But no human being can tame the tongue. He gives 3 different word images, right? He put a bit in a horse's mouth, which for them in the first century, this was a common animal, but it's also enormous relative to the size of a human being. And so they're thinking, man, this huge animal, you just put this bit and you just left and right, here we go, stop and go. Or then he says, let's make it larger. Let's talk about a ship. Let's talk about a ship and just how big it is. In the first century, they're using sails, right, and oars, and the wind drives it. But then the direction it goes is just a small rudder on the back. But then he gets to the truth. He says, the truth is, think about how small a spark begins and how large a forest fire becomes. He said, that's what the tongue can do. That's the power the tongue has. That's the power our words have. They can be the smallest comment that sets ablaze an entire life. The smallest thing that you would think that our life has direction to it, but then for some reason our words give so much direction to our life. And then he ends with this phrase, no human being can tame the tongue. That's wild. Think about that. He says, look, we've tamed so many things, but the tongue is not something we have the ability to tame. Why is that? Jesus gives us some pretty good insight. I'm going to connect some dots, so stay with me for the next probably 8 minutes for us to put all these dots here. It says, this is what Jesus says. For the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. For the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. Thinking back to the last thing his little brother said, no human being can tame the tongue. Why is that? And then Jesus begins to unveil the answer. He says, hey, because the mouth simply speaks what the heart is full of. Now, to give you some more context, I'm going to read the entire passage where Jesus says this. He's having a conversation, and he gives a couple of word pictures as well. Let's take a look at it in Matthew 12. Make a tree good, and its fruit will be good. Or make a tree bad, and its fruit will be bad. For a tree is recognized by its fruit. That makes sense. When we look at an apple tree, how do we know it's an apple tree? Unless those of you who are like arborist enthusiasts and can look by the leaves. I can't do that. But I can tell because there's an apple on it, right? I can tell it's an orange deal because there's oranges on it. He says, you brood of vipers, how can you who are evil say anything good? For the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. A good man brings good things out of the good stored up in him, and an evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in him. But I tell you that everyone will have to give account on the day of judgment for every empty word they have spoken. For by your words you will be acquitted, and by your words you will be condemned. Now there's a lot there. But basically, to summarize it, Jesus is saying this: our words are an outward reflection of an inward reality. That's the truth. Our words are an outward reflection of an inward reality. He's saying, look, how can you, if you want to be a good apple tree, you don't have the ability to bring good apples out of you if there's nothing healthy on the inside. If whatever's going on the inside eventually will come out. Now you can pretend, you can go to church on Sunday and check the box so that when people ask you, hey, are you at church? Yeah, man, we go to church most Sundays at such and such downtown. And that's one thing. But then the truth is, when we look at the 167, are there any apples there? Are there any oranges there? Or do you just have to put a sign on your tree that says apple tree because you don't ever produce any apples? But you want to be an apple tree, so you put the sign there, and it convinces people because there's a label, Christian. And as long as we have that label, maybe we can convince some people this is actually who we are. Now, if we piece it together, though, little brother of Jesus says, look, you can't tame the tongue. Jesus gives us some insight into why, because out of the heart, or what's happening inside of us, that's the overflow comes out of our mouth, that our words are an outward reflection of an inward reality. In other words, our heart wrestles with the reality of our imperfection, and the imperfection piles up. The imperfection in our words comes in things like gossip, or criticizing someone to condemn them, not to construct something better in them. It comes in the form of deceit, just plain out not telling the truth, or not being willing to give the whole truth because it changes the outcome that you're looking for. It comes in complaining to a point where there's no solution. It's just, I would prefer everyone else be miserable with me. And the Bible calls all of those things, where their words go south, calls it sin. And what James is saying when he says, hey, no man can tame the tongue, Jesus gives us the next piece that says, and the reason for that is that the mouth speaks what the heart is full of. The truth is, the only way to solve what our heart is full of, every single one of us, is to come up with a sin solution, which we cannot do on our own. That's why James says no one can tame it, because he knows the tongue's issue is a sin issue, not a tongue issue. And the reason we can't tame the tongue is not because the tongue is so difficult to tame, but because it's a reflection of what's happening in the heart, which is a sin problem. Which means men don't have the ability to do anything to clean out the heart. But Jesus does. Like, that was the whole idea is, hey, I want to give you the opportunity to make some apples, to make some oranges, because not because you're going to get good at something, but because I'm going to come into who you are, into your entire life, and we're going to clean up the mess that's in there. And then the overflow of that will show up in our words. Now, we might have some alternative ways of dealing with sin that we've come up with in our culture. Not that they stand on any kind of basis or really strong grounds, but just logically for us, it just makes sense sometimes. We'll have some influencers or maybe politicians from time to time or celebrities or just friends in our friend circle that will say things like, no, it's not really about sin and good and evil and heaven and hell and the whole Jesus thing. That's not it. It's just about if you're a good person. And if you're a good person, you'll be fine. According to who? Well, according to that's how I think the world works. You realize there's 8 billion of us on this planet right now at this moment, not to include the billions of other people that existed prior to all of us existing right now. And you think that out of all those billions and billions and billions and billions of people, you figured out the logic behind good and evil. That's wild. But that's what we think. Oh, well, as long as we have more good deeds than bad deeds. Like just as long as we're able to tip the scales of justice in our favor. We come up with solutions, but I don't think they're really good solutions. You know, the truth is, the only way to deal with our sin condition, which leads to a words condition, is Jesus. Which is why we started with the reality that if you're struggling in the 167 with your words, the struggle is really, have I given all parts of my life to Jesus? But words are just part of it. The truth is, words and actions often are married to one another. And to talk a little bit about this, we go back to the little brother of Jesus, to James. He says this, "What good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such a faith save them? Suppose a brother or a sister is without clothes or daily food. If one of you says to them, 'Go in peace, keep warm and well fed,' but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead." Now, we'll say there's a danger here in this passage because it gets read a lot. And the danger is that it gives an example. It says, look, homeless or hungry, if we have that opportunity and it's just like, have a great day, you know, that's a problem. And so in our minds, though, all of a sudden, our faith or our actions are boiled down to another checkbox. Got it, okay. If I find someone homeless, got to work at that. If I find someone hungry, bridging the gap. All right, we got it. We got two options. And now I've checked my box for the 160. That is not what James is saying. He's simply illustrating this is what it looks like in a very practical application to make sure that your faith or your 1 hour you give to Jesus a week, that your faith, your name Christian, goes with some actions. He just gives an example. But it's much more than that. It's much more inclusive than that to everything we do, not just these big opportunities to feed someone or help someone find some place to sleep at night. See, the truth is, it's through our actions that our faith breathes. So how often do you have to breathe? I would say often. And more often if you walk upstairs a lot, you know? And so when we say, hey, what does it look? It's not just a homeless, check the box. Hungry, check the box. Because all that gives us is 3 boxes checked. I went to church, I helped the homeless, I helped somebody who was hungry. And if that's what we get from the little brother of Jesus and Jesus himself, we have missed it. He's just saying, look, I'm just trying to give you an example. But this is an ongoing thing. Something as big as homeless and hungry, something as small as just, maybe you just feel inside of you, this person that's standing in front of you just needed someone to listen to them this week. That they actually didn't need you to buy them lunch or figure out how to connect them with the Nest Shelter in downtown Noonan. But they simply just needed you to listen and to care what they had to say. And maybe that's not a box you can check because it might lead to a follow-up conversation that you feel ill-prepared to have. But even still, when we wake up in the morning and say, God, my 167 belongs to you, doesn't matter if it's a big checkbox or a little checkbox. It's no checkbox at all. It's just when I breathe, When I breathe, I have life. When my actions follow Jesus, my faith has life. How often should we breathe? All the time. The church planter Paul says this to his church in Colossae. He says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord and not for human masters. Let that just sit for a second. He gives us a set of instructions. He said, hey, with whatever you're doing, I love that he says whatever you do. Doesn't matter, fill in the blank. However you answer, if I were to ask you the question, so what do you do? However you answer that question, it includes that. When I say, what do you do when you're not doing that? Whatever you answer to that question, it includes that. When I say, well, but tell me about your family and how that whole, whatever that answer is, it includes that. Whatever you do, work with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for human master. Now listen to this. This is the crazy part. This is the crazy part. He gives a list of people that he's talking to right around this passage that he's specifically speaking to. This is the list. Wives, husbands, children, parents. Those go together, right? Like, okay, I can see how those are all connected. And then he adds another one, slaves. Now, one of these things is not like the other, you know? Like one of these things does not belong in this grouping, which is wild. Wives, husbands, children, parents, slaves. Now, I want to push time out here. For sure, historically, there have been people in the church that have leveraged this passage to endorse slavery. That's not what's happening here. Anybody says that is absolutely off their rocker, and they should come have a conversation with me. I will set them straight. However, what he is trying to say here, he puts those four there, and he includes slavery. He says, here's the deal. Some things we would see as blessings, and then there are some things absolutely are not counted as blessings. But regardless of your circumstances, whether you can control them or not control them, our response as Jesus followers is the same every day. I get 167 outside of my 1 hour at church. It belongs to you. Whether I'm a wife, husband, father, mother, parent, child, or even the worst circumstances I can think for myself, a slave. And in all those circumstances, I would give God my very best that day. And here's the thing. We can see throughout our own country's history, we don't have to go back 2,000 years. We can see in our own country's history how the slaves that were here in the United States modeled this passage over and over again. Some of the songs we sing are because they got up every day in circumstances that absolutely they didn't ask for or endorse or hope for themselves, but they said, hey, I'm going to give you the worst part of my life. And that's where it was. And our country and church as a whole has been blessed by that faithfulness, which is wild to think through. You know, he says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord and not for human masters. Now, that's the what. But he goes a step further in the next piece. And he gives us a why. I want you to listen to it. I'm going to read 23 again. It says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord and not for human masters. That's the what. Here's the why. Since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. In other words, there might not be a reward right now in this moment for you giving your 167 to whoever it is, whatever your circumstance is. But God is saying, hey, if you will give me your life, there is a reward for you. In other words, with our words and our actions, the why matters. He said, I don't want to just give you the what that I expect. I want to give you the why it matters. This is the why behind the what I'm asking you to do. It's because there's something waiting on you. There's something for you. But the truth is, he's still not done. When we read this passage, he starts with a set of instructions. Here's your what. And then he follows it up with, and here's your why. But the truth is, both the what and the why come from something stronger than both of them combined. It comes from the who. Yes, words and actions matter. Thoughts are the breath of our faith. Actions are the breath of our faith. The why matters. But there's one more incredible piece that makes the what and the why make sense. Let's reread verse 23 again. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. And here we get to the who. It is the Lord Christ you are serving. It's Jesus. It's Jesus. Now here's the truth. Every single one of us has someone that sits in that driver's seat. Sometimes it can be a group of people, but there's only spot for one little group. That's it, just one. And we have the ability to compartmentalize in our life. And so sometimes, depending on where we are, we will switch out who's in charge up there, the who seat. For example, I would imagine that for some, that when we go to work, all of a sudden the person that's in the who seat, like what are we working for, might be our boss. And we might work and say, yeah, I want to meet those expectations. They put those expectations, I want to meet those expectations. And I want to show up every day, and I want to make him or her proud. Or maybe it's not even the boss. Maybe it's the money that comes from doing your work. Like, hey, well, the reason I go to work is because I want to provide. And the reason that I provide, or the reason I'm going to give everything I got, is because I want to be able to provide better. And if I do really good, then that finances is up there. Maybe they will increase my pay with a thing called a raise because I do so good at my job. And so now that raise sits up there in the who seat. Or maybe you are in a relationship and your significant other or your spouse sits in that seat. That the reason you wake up in the morning is because of her face or his face. And when you're thinking through, why am I going so hard? Why am I on the grind so hard? Why am I doing these things? Because I want to provide. I want to provide for them. I want to make sure they got a life that maybe they never dreamed of. That I made a promise when I was in high school, I was going to do this, and I'm delivering on that promise. And when I wake up in the morning, their face is in my head, and that's my who. Or maybe you're some of those really strange people that like adore your kids, you know? And you think they're perfect. I'm kidding, adoring is good. But you think your kids are perfect. And maybe your spouse or your significant other used to sit in that seat, but then you really got to know them and you've taken them out and you put your children there. And now your children are, man, they're the reason I breathe, baby. They're my lifeblood. And now you're struggling thinking, what will life be without? What will life be when I have to live without them? Because you're going to leave somewhere. And you have secret plans to make them play video games in the basement so they never leave. Like, that's your idea. You're going to complain about it out loud, but secretly you're like, I love this. But no, you put your kids up there. And say, man, this is why I do what I do. I wake up. And I go to work for them. And I do what I do for them. Maybe if you're in school, it's the popular kid. I mean, I want to get on their radar. I just want to get on their radar. Or maybe it's just some goal that you set. Be debt-free by X. I want to be able to travel this place. I want to achieve this goal. And that sits in your who spot. But let me ask you a question. Just go with me for a second. Let's go back to the people who have the boss in the who spot at work. Okay, let me talk to you for a second. Just go with me. Take your boss off just for a second and put Jesus there. Now tell me, is your boss more thankful or less thankful for you as an employee if you're working for Jesus and not just some guy who maybe can croak over dead any day now? Does the company you work for, are they more blessed by your presence or less blessed by your presence? Because all of a sudden, you're not working for just a guy who signs a check, but you're working for the King of Kings. Let me go to the people who put their spouse there. Take your spouse off for a second. Just set them aside. You don't have to hurt them. Just set them aside. And now put Jesus there. Now let me ask you a question. Does your spouse benefit more from you having Jesus in that spot, or do they benefit less from you having Jesus in that spot? Let's talk about your kids. You'll be a great parent. Take your kids just for a second They won't even know you moved them. They won't even know. Just move them over a second. Put Jesus there. Now, are you a better parent to those kids? Are those kids getting a better version of you with Jesus being in the spot? Or are they getting a worse version of you because now Jesus is in that spot? Well, I think the answer is pretty clear. Who does your 167 serve? You serve somebody or somebody's or something. There is something in the who spot. And the truth is, the who, I know we did it backwards where we said, hey, it's the what, here's the why, here's the who. The truth is, the who informs the why and then informs the what. And whoever the who is has the ability to change everything that comes from it. Everything. Now, as I wrap up, I don't want you to let yourself off the hook this morning with just listening to me and maybe processing. I actually want you to answer the question, like right now. I want you to answer it. Who's in your who spot? Don't hear me and think, oh yeah, it could be a boss or it could be, no. Answer it. Not out loud, that'd be weird. But you, just to your head, right? Just in your head. Who is in your who spot? Every single one. Don't let yourself off the hook. Answer your question. And it's not for my benefit. I can't hear you. It's your benefit. Just be honest with yourself. Just be honest with yourself. Who's sitting there? Everybody ought to have a name or a picture of some faces. Or a picture of some money, something. Answer the question for you. And then, if it's not Jesus, we might have all defaulted to, I bet it's Jesus. And if you got to bet it's Jesus, it ain't Jesus, okay? And it's okay to be honest. Because remember, back in Proverbs, he sees all the good and the bad. He sees it already. So you don't have to hide it from him. You don't have to think you're hurt God's feelings if you're like, actually, God, you haven't been there. He's there, I'm like, oh no, my heart's broken. He's like, yeah, my heart's been broken since you were born. And the cross has been after you the whole time. This is no problem. This is nothing new. I'm still pursuing you. I'm still coming after you. I'm not giving up on you. So the question is, that courage we all prayed for before we got started, is my hope that things are clear. But with clarity, it always requires some courage for us to make some changes. And it's courage that we pray for every week when we do Bible study. Because the truth is, when we get into the nitty-gritty of our life, evil's a real thing. Satan's a real person. That's a legit obstacle that pushes back against the changes that we want to make. And will sell us all kind of goods. Like, well, I mean, your spouse is there and it's informed a little bit by Jesus. Like we kind of see him through a Jesus lens. Yeah, if you want to get real deep, truth is, anybody but Jesus is going on a pedestal. The Bible has a word for it. It's called idolatry. And man, Satan can sell idolatry like nobody's business. Idolatry with a flash, a little taste, a sprinkle of Jesus, feels kind of like Jesus. But if it ain't Jesus, it ain't Jesus. So I hope you've answered your question in your head. And it's my hope that you're tapping into some of that courage we prayed for to make an adjustment. I want to end with this. I want to challenge you, for those of you who didn't say Jesus, I want to challenge you, give it a week. Let's just go a week. Let's see what happens if you make some intentional decisions this week to put Jesus there instead of whoever or whatever was there. And now I don't know how you're gonna do this. I'm not gonna program this for you. I'll give you a suggestion. For some of you who need a lot of reminders, and you got a telephone, a smartphone, you can set alarms in there. And in my phone, you can label those alarms. And so you might need to set an alarm once every 2 hours. Maybe it's just a vibrating alarm. It's not gonna make a huge noise. Maybe it's just a vibrating alarm that just starts with the time you get out of bed, and every 2 hours after that, that just says, hey, my 167 belongs to Jesus. And maybe that's what you need for a week. Just say, hey, how do I make sure I keep retraining my mind, my thoughts, and my actions to center back up to say, okay, if I were to make an inventory list of the conversations I've had today, And the actions that I've taken today, would I put God honoring in the little Excel sheet, spreadsheet, categorization file next to it? Would it say God honoring, or would it say something else? And I want to make sure I'm labeling up and having a ton of God. And so whatever you need to remind yourself, maybe a sticky note on the bathroom in the morning. Maybe you need to ask your spouse if she's packing your lunch or he's packing your lunch tomorrow, put a little sticky note in your lunchbox and your lunch tin before she buckles it up. I don't know. It's up to you. But I would say, hey, give it a week. Just see for a week. If you were to constantly think on words and actions dedicated to Jesus for a week, where would you be? Let's just see. Who does your 167 serve? Well, your 167 starts in about 9 minutes. And you're going to find out. Because your life is yours to live. And you can't hide the truth from you. It's my hope we all might give Jesus a shot this week.